Another week, another Q&A. So for those of you just joining us, all you have to do is leave your questions in the comment section below, and maybe they'll be answered on next week's show. So I'm going to be starting this Q&A off with a question from Squam Ham, and the reason I'm specifically using his question first is because I can actually explain why sometimes I miss the Monday upload. So he says, Q&A, what are you doing this week? We don't hear enough about your personal life, and you seem like a very interesting person. So Squam Ham, I can answer this and also explain why sometimes I miss the Monday upload. Starting last year, there's been a kind of pain that's been manifesting. Now, last year, the way it would kind of come and go is it would flare up for about a day or two, and then it would just go away for a couple of weeks, only to flare up again, and it's been getting more consistent as time has gone on, and ever since The Division 2 launched, that's about where the pain started, and now it has consistently remained, and it has not gone away. And this is the longest time I have been in pain without it ever subsiding and leaving. It's been making videos really hard, because usually the pain really hurts when I'm sitting in front of the computer. Like, usually lying down helps. For some reason, straightening out my body really helps with it. The pain's located in my lower abdomen. It's kind of my intestines. I'm not sure if it is my intestines or if it's something around my intestines, but the best way to describe what it feels like is it feels like there's a belt that's tightening around my stomach and getting tighter and tighter. My intestines feel really just squeezed. Like, it hurts a lot. It's really uncomfortable. I'm not quite sure what's wrong and yeah. And this is the longest time I've had this pain, and I don't know what it is. Last year, I got checked out by a doctor. They put a camera in my body, and they were like, no, there's nothing wrong with your intestines. We don't see anything wrong. They look a little bit inflamed, but that's about it. And then they just sent me home and said, it's just stress. Well, no, okay, this is not stress anymore. Something is clearly wrong with my body, and I need to figure out what it is. Because it's starting to interfere with my life. Something I'm very anxious about is my older sister has EDS. It's a type of genetic thing. And unfortunately, not enough people in the world have it to where companies will invest money into actually researching it, because, you know, the dark secret about having a profitable industry based off of people's health is that if there's no money to be made, they don't really care. So there isn't a cure for EDS, there isn't a lot of research into it, we just know that it actually exists, and that's about it. And unfortunately, my sister said this was around the age where she started to have problems that started to point her in the direction of EDS, and sure enough, she found out that she has it, and it's genetic, and I'm like, oh no. No, we're not doing this. So, this week, I'm gonna see what I can do to find out if I do have it. I don't know if there's testing or whatever, but something's wrong. It's definitely not just stress, and it's affecting my ability to make content. So unfortunately, that's kind of what's been going on with me in my personal life over the last couple of weeks. But I do have a couple interesting projects in the works. So my next video of the history of weapon videos is going to be on the energy sword. I'm also working on a video that'll be dissecting the downgrades of Combat Evolved compared to its original console version. Because, believe it or not, the Master Chief Collection, when you switch back to the classic graphics for Combat Evolved, that's not actually what it looked like on the original Xbox. It's been heavily downgraded. Effects are missing, textures are broken, like a lot of stuff. It's going to be a pretty extensive video that'll break down a lot of that stuff, but it's pretty interesting. I'm currently playing through Combat Evolved with someone who extensively understands the code, because he's been modding Combat Evolved for well over a decade at this point, and he thinks that it's something that the community should know about, because going forward, We shouldn't be misremembering Combat Evolved, the game that started the Halo series, with the broken MCC version. It doesn't look like the original version. But the next question comes from Thomas Klauser, who says, Q&A, would you like to see Sergeant Johnson have a son that fights with Master Chief against the Covenant in Halo Infinite? And then Chief meets him and he says, I knew your father. And we maybe get a flashback of Johnson dying on the Ark. Keep up the good work. So, I have seen a lot of people kind of theorizing ways that they could bring back Johnson, if not physically, then have him come back spiritually by having a son who looks exactly like him and has the same personality. In my opinion, I think Johnson can just come back. It would be pretty silly and pretty stupid, but somebody did have a really good way that they could bring Johnson back, which is in Halo Wars 2, or around that kind of conflict that's taking place on the Ark, have the Spirit of Fire discover a cryptum. And they open up the cryptum, and Johnson's there. And it turns out when Chief made a bail for it, some Sentinels came for Johnson, recognized him as a human or a reclaimer, and saw that his vitals were critical, so they shoved him into a cryptum and had it heal him, you know, because the Sentinels want to make sure that they're preserving life that isn't flood. But yeah, that was a solution I saw somebody come up with, and I'm like, yes, do that. That's very silly, and you're stretching what could be believable, but if it means we could have Johnson back and we could have a bit more humor, do it now. So that's kind of how I would bring Johnson back. The whole son thing, unfortunately, I don't think Johnson could have a son, or I wouldn't personally like that, because for me it's like, but it's not Johnson. It's just a cheap way to be like, look, he's Johnson, but he's not actually Johnson. That's how I feel, though. The next question comes from Cosmic Hazard, who says, Q&A, do you think that people are overreacting by saying that Halo coming back to PC will destroy the Xbox player base? Or do you think it won't have a difference? In my opinion, it will not have a difference. People are not going to suddenly ditch their consoles to play on PC, because contrary to popular belief, people don't exclusively buy consoles just to play the exclusive games. Sure, there are some people who do buy Xbox purely so that they can play Halo, but there are some people who just buy an Xbox because they want a console. Not everybody on planet Earth has a high-end PC or even a medium-end PC. Some people just have a console and maybe a crappy laptop so that they can do work from home or something like that. Consoles are an entire industry that makes money, and contrary to, you know, the way that people assume that the Xbox One is a flop, it's not a flop. It's not selling as much as the PS4 naturally, but that also doesn't mean that there isn't a large number of people in the world who own Xbox Ones. It's well over 30 million at this point. 30 million, that's a lot of people that own Xbox Ones. And the entire Xbox console will not be abandoned once Halo drops on PC, because not everyone buys consoles for the exclusives. Halo 5, I believe, sold like 10 million at launch or whatever. That's not the entire Xbox user base. There's still a lot more who don't really care about Halo, and they're just playing Call of Duty or whatever. Like, no. Consoles will be fine. The only reason people are buying Xbox is not purely because of Halo. They're not going to suddenly ditch their entire library of games, all their achievement and gamer score that they've been building up. They're not going to ditch the Xbox console just because Halo is now on Steam. Some people will, but not the vast majority. When Gears of War began making its way back to PC this generation, the community was still the most active on Xbox. When Microsoft began releasing all their exclusives on PC, they still sold much better on the Xbox than they did on the PC, and the communities were a lot higher. No, Xbox will be fine. The next question comes from Poke Chief Dude, who says, Q&A, you may have received this question before. If you could create a Promethean Forerunner enemy of your own, what would it be? Name, aesthetic, weapon roster, abilities, sandbox rule, etc., etc. It can be an addition to the current Promethean faction or replace an enemy type of theirs, it's up to you. This is actually a pretty interesting question, and I'm unfortunately going to steal an idea from a friend of mine. So Jeremy Cook, who sadly left 343 Industries last week, I'm excited to see where he's going to go, and I'm going to be actively following him, but he was the lead art director for Halo Wars 2. He is the brains behind The Banished, their look, their aesthetic, the Spirit of Fire and stuff. He kind of created the atmosphere of the conflict on the Ark. He was the art director, and I was talking to him once at a party, and he was saying that if he could have unlimited resources, unlimited time, and he could execute this, how he would have handled a Forerunner enemy faction in Halo Wars 2 is, so you've got the Banished and you've got the UNSC, and they both have their units, right? Like you've got your buildings and stuff, and you have to create your various different units that fall into types. Well, if he were to design Forerunners, he would have probably, now he was just spitballing ideas, because obviously none of this is actual, it's purely hypothetical on his part. He would design them around, instead of having different unit types, you'd have one single unit, and that unit is very modular. Like, you'd have a little Forerunner robot, and it could be told to become a base, or a stationary thing that could produce more of them. And basically, as you build up the economy, you'd be building more of these Forerunner robots, and you'd be ordering them to fall into certain archetypes. Like, all right, you guys are going to ditch your guns, and you're going to become flying enemies that can actually lift up Forerunner soldiers and bring them to and fro the battle. So basically, you'd have one enemy type that can become an assortment of various different things, and I think that would be pretty cool, honestly, even in a first-person shooter setting. We talked in the previous video about if you were to handle precursor-type enemies that are formless. The way I would do it is like a Forerunner pure form in Halo, or a Flood pure form in Halo 3. You'd have it constantly morphing and mutating to fit different roles as you fight them, and why not for the Prometheans? Instead of having them just kind of be Covenant but glowy and orange and less fun to fight, have it be Sentinels, and the Sentinels would take a little bit of damage, they'd retreat, and they'd go to one of their spawn points, and the spawn point would like outfit them with legs and actually give them a gun and stuff, and then they would drop to the ground, and now it's an enemy that has legs, and if you damage one of the legs, maybe it hits the floor, and then it starts like transforming into a stationary gun that another one will jump on and start using. Stuff like that would be kind of interesting and very modular. The battle would be constantly shifting depending on what forms they're taking. So yeah, I don't know. That's just me throwing it out there kind of on the spot, but... The next question comes from Eyecatcher, who says, Q&A, with the obvious art style change back to the original in Halo Infinite, do you think 343 will explain this sudden change lore-wise? Or how do you think? This is, a question that I get asked probably every 2 weeks or so. So I guess I'll probably make this my final answer to this repeated question. Though to be fair, not a lot of you watch the Q&As as far back. Some of you are relatively new. So for future reference, the answer to this type of question would be, they don't need to have somebody dump some exposition on the player when Halo Infinite starts of, 4 years ago, this happened, and that's why Halo looks more like Halo again. No, the way that I assume we're supposed to interpret it is that since Frank O'Connor said on the Reset Era forums that there will be a big time jump with Infinite, like Infinite will not take place immediately after Halo 5. It'll take place years after Halo 5, as the UNSC has been on the run for years and years. This is how I assume they're probably going to do it. Everything just looks like classic Halo, and what you get via dialogue between characters and stuff is that a lot of time has passed. Who knows? Chief's this is probably his 3rd or 4th armor that he's gotten since the events of Halo 5. They've been on the run, their tech has been breaking, they've had to salvage old tech, even create some new by kit bashing, remains that they found from previous battles and stuff. The galaxy is in a state of war right now, and they don't really have access to Earth the way that they used to. The UNSC has kind of got to make it on its own, so in a funny way, kind of like the Banished, where they are constantly just like gathering junk and building new things. That's kind of what I assume the UNSC is going to be doing. They're going to be returning to older tech that hasn't been compromised by AIs, and that'll be kind of why we see a lot of old designs returning. And I assume that's, how they're going to keep old designs. When we do defeat Cortana and her dumb robot overlords, then I assume we're just going to keep the old stuff and go on from there, with Halo looking a bit more like classic Halo. That's just how I feel. I wouldn't look for a clunky exposition dump where the game stops dead in its tracks to explain to you why things look different. You're just supposed to assume, yeah, a lot can happen in 4 years. The final question comes from Chef, who says, Q&A. Regarding the Hunters or the LateNightHalo more specifically, what do you think about 343 expanding on the Hunters as a species in the main game? In the books in Halo Wars 2, we get to see how they can turn into a large variety of shapes and sizes, but in the main games, we always get the same old Hunters. Don't get me wrong, I love Hunters, but I feel it's a wasted opportunity to not have the LateNightHalo turn into forms like the Goliath, or have 2 Hunters combine into one large Hunter similar to how Colony works in Halo Wars 2. I think there's a lot of potential there for a new enemy variety. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. It all depends on how you would execute the idea. So, as far as an RTS game goes, there is a lot of room and a lot of flexibility for how you could do the Hunters. Now, in a first-person shooter setting, it's one thing to say, wouldn't this be super cool if we did this? But it's another thing to actually make it fun as far as combat goes. You don't want to break the combat loop. The Hunters in Halo 5 were 343 attempting to experiment, to deviate away from what we traditionally know, and I think it ended with disastrous results. I think the Hunters in Halo 5 are really not fun to fight, because they no longer flow well within combat. They're bosses, and Halo over and over has shown that bosses don't really work. They need to be kind of approached differently. The Scarab is a much better idea for a boss than the Hunters in Halo 5, where the level stops, and you're just forced to knock down this bullet sponge enemy. Now, Goliaths, I think would actually be super cool as far as enemies could go, and you pitched the idea of 2 Hunters. When they maybe suffer enough damage both at the same time, they join hands and turn into a giant Goliath Hunter that you have to take down. That could be super cool. I could even envision maybe the way that it works is, since Goliaths don't really have the traditional shield and arm cannon like normal Hunters, they're just kind of like giant hunter gorillas. They run around on all fours. You could have this thing kind of charge you like a bull, and the idea how you weaken it is you've got to take out one leg, take out another leg, then take out both of the 2 front arms, and then it just kind of sits there as a mushy, squishy pile of worms attempting to reform itself back into a Goliath, and that's when you can jump on its back, shove a grenade into the pile, hop off, and then the entire worm pile just goes up in flames, something kind of like that. It would be pretty cool. It would keep you constantly moving. I think the conflict could be fast-paced, because you don't want this to be a bullet sponge. You want the encounter with it to be really quick, but really difficult, which, if we're supposed to ignore the one-shot kill pistol from Combat Evolved, that was kind of the beauty of the Hunters. You could take them down really quickly, but they were, in theory, supposed to be really difficult. The idea was, at a range, they're really hard to deal with because they've got their shield and they've got their cannon that can hit, like, almost one-shot you. So if you can get close to them, the closer you are, the weaker there are, till when you're right behind them, there's pretty much nothing they can do and you just gun them down instantly. The fun comes from getting close to them without them killing you. So I think that the Hunter Worms could be very interesting if they were done correctly. It all depends on if the enemy that they'd be forming is fun to fight. It shouldn't be a drawn-out conflict that takes forever to gun down. It should be short, sweet, but difficult. Guys, I hope that answers all of your questions for this week. Ask some more interesting questions for next week. And also, down below, I want you guys to suggest videos for me that you want me to explore. They can be long, 20-minute scripted videos, or they can be kind of like the short and sweet ones. Kind of like why Halo's Marines are great, why Halo vehicle levels are great. Just give me some suggestions down below, because sometimes it is hard to come up with ideas that you would find probably interesting for videos. I want to make the content that you want to watch. So, guys, comment down below, and I'll see you on the next video.